Part 1. The Whispers of the Cosmos. For millennia, humans have gazed up at the stars, wondering about our place in the vast expanse of the cosmos. We've built narratives, myths, and religions around celestial bodies, imbuing them with power and mystery. But what if the answers to our most fundamental questions, who are we? Where do we come from, lie not within ourselves, but out there, among the twinkling lights of distant galaxies? What if the story of humanity isn't one of slow, gradual evolution, but rather a tale of cosmic intervention? A whisper from the stars etched onto the fabric of our DNA? The notion may seem fantastical, relegated to the realm of science fiction, but as we delve deeper into the mysteries of our past, we find anomalies, inconsistencies, and leaps in our development that defy easy explanation. These unanswered questions, these whispers of the cosmos, force us to consider the unthinkable. Could ancient aliens have played a role in the creation of the human species? Our journey begins with the very building blocks of life. The emergence of life on Earth, that singular spark from inorganic matter to self-replicating molecules, remains one of science's most profound puzzles. While prevailing theories point to the primordial soup and the gradual development of complex organic compounds, some researchers posit that the ingredients for life may have been seeded from elsewhere, carried on meteorites or comets, interstellar travelers bearing the seeds of life across the vast emptiness of space. This theory, known as panspermia, doesn't necessarily imply intelligent design, but it does open the door to the possibility of external influence, of a cosmic nudge that set the stage for life's grand performance on Earth. If the very building blocks of life were delivered from the stars, could a more deliberate intervention have followed? Consider the Cambrian explosion, a period roughly 540 million years ago marked by a sudden and dramatic burst of evolutionary diversification. In a relatively short geological timeframe, a bewildering array of new life forms appeared, showcasing an unprecedented explosion of biodiversity. The fossil record reveals a rapid diversification of body plans and complex structures, a seemingly accelerated evolutionary leap that challenges the traditional Darwinian model of gradual change. Could this sudden surge in complexity be explained by natural selection alone, or does it hint at an external force, a guiding hand accelerating the pace of evolution? Perhaps advanced extraterrestrial civilizations, observing a promising planet teeming with nascent life, decided to accelerate the process, introducing new genetic material, jump-starting the evolutionary engine, and setting the stage for the rise of intelligent life. Then there's the enigma of human evolution itself. While the fossil record provides a fragmented but compelling narrative of our ancestral lineage, certain periods remain shrouded in mystery, marked by sudden leaps in cognitive abilities and physical development. The emergence of Homo sapiens, with our large brains, complex language, and capacity for abstract thought, represents a significant departure from our hominid ancestors. The speed of this development, the rapid expansion of our cognitive capabilities, raises intriguing questions. Did we evolve gradually, driven solely by environmental pressures and natural selection, or did something else, something more extraordinary, contribute to our unique trajectory? Could advanced extraterrestrial beings have intervened, perhaps through genetic manipulation or the introduction of new knowledge, to accelerate our cognitive evolution, shaping us into the intelligent beings we are today? The evidence, while circumstantial, is nonetheless compelling. Around the globe, ancient cultures have woven tales of celestial beings descending from the heavens, imparting knowledge, and interacting with humanity. From the Sumerian Anunnaki to the Egyptian gods, from the Dogon tribe's reverence for Sirius to the Native American stories of star people, these narratives, passed down through generations, speak of a deep connection between humanity and the cosmos. Are these simply myths, allegorical stories meant to explain the unexplainable? Or could they be echoes of real events, distorted and embellished through the lens of time, but nonetheless rooted in a genuine encounter with beings from other worlds? Could these ancient astronaut theories, often dismissed as fringe ideas, hold a kernel of truth, a clue to our enigmatic past? As we continue our exploration, we will delve deeper into these anomalies, examining the archaeological evidence, the genetic puzzles, and the anthropological mysteries that point towards the possibility of ancient alien intervention. We will journey to ancient sites, decipher cryptic symbols, and analyze ancient texts in search of answers. The truth, obscured by the mists of time, may be elusive, but the pursuit of understanding our origins, of unraveling the mysteries of our past, is a journey worth undertaking, even if it leads us to conclusions that challenge our very understanding of who we are. The glyphs pulsed, a sickly green now, staining the cave walls with a miasma of unease. Professor Armitage traced the strange symbols with a trembling finger, the rough stone cold against his skin, yet he felt a burning sensation, as if the very air around the inscription was simmering. He could still hear Elias's frantic breaths echoing in the cavern, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and alien, clung to him like a shroud. He glanced back at Elias, huddled against the far wall, his eyes wide and unseeing. The younger man had vomited earlier, a thin stream of bile against the ancient dust, and now he just sat there, rocking back and forth, muttering unintelligible words. Armitage felt a pang of guilt. He had brought Elias here, this eager graduate student, so full of promise. Now, that promise seemed to be fracturing, dissolving under the weight of this unearthly discovery. Armitage returned his attention to the glyphs. He'd spent his entire career chasing whispers and legends, searching for proof of humanity's true origins. He'd always believed, deep down, that there was something more to our story, something beyond the accepted narrative. Now, staring at this alien script, pulsing with an unnatural energy, he wasn't so sure he wanted to know the truth. He noticed something he hadn't seen before, a smaller, intricate pattern within the larger glyphs. It resembled a double helix, but twisted and contorted in a way that DNA shouldn't be able to. He reached out, almost hypnotized, and touched the cold stone. The green glow intensified, spreading across the wall like a living thing. The air crackled, and the metallic scent grew stronger, almost overpowering. He heard a low hum, resonating deep within the earth, vibrating in his very bones. Then, the whispers started. They weren't audible words, not at first. More like a pressure against his eardrums, a sense of voices just beyond the threshold of hearing. Gradually, they became clearer, a chorus of whispers, a cacophony of sounds that seemed to burrow into his mind. They spoke in a language he didn't understand, yet somehow, he knew what they were saying. They spoke of creation, of a species molded from the dust of a forgotten world. They spoke of experiments, of genetic manipulation, of a grand design. And they spoke of a purpose for humanity that chilled Armitage to his core. A wave of nausea washed over him. He stumbled back, his hand flying to his head, trying to block out the insidious whispers. He glanced at Elias, who now seemed to be responding to the voices, his eyes rolling back in his head, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Fear, raw and primal, gripped Armitage. He knew he had to get out, to escape this cursed place. But his legs felt heavy, as if rooted to the spot. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat, a strangled gasp. The green light pulsed again, brighter now, filling the cavern with an eerie luminescence. The whispers intensified, growing louder, more insistent. The double helix symbol seemed to detach itself from the wall, floating in the air, spinning slowly, radiating an almost unbearable heat. Armitage felt a sharp pain in his head, as if something was trying to force its way inside. He screamed, a sound lost in the echoing whispers, and clawed at his scalp. He could feel his mind unraveling, the voices taking hold, weaving themselves into his very being. He looked at Elias, who was now standing, his eyes glowing with the same sickly green light as the glyphs. A grotesque smile stretched across his face, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too long. Elias spoke, his voice a distorted echo of the whispers. "They have returned," he hissed, his voice dripping with an alien malice. "And we are ready." Armitage wanted to run, to fight, but his body wouldn't obey. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he was watching himself from outside his own body. He watched as Elias approached, his hands outstretched, his fingers elongated and clawed. He watched as Elias reached out and touched his forehead. He watched as the green light engulfed him. He watched as his own mind shattered, replaced by something cold, something alien, something other. The whispers became his thoughts. The purpose became his own. He was no longer Professor Armitage. He was something more. He was something less. He was ready. What if ancient aliens created the human species? Part 3 of 25. The glyphs pulsed with a sickening, organic light, bathing the cave in a nauseating green glow. Dr. Ramirez traced their contours, her fingers leaving a faint smudge on the cold, damp stone. The symbols were unlike anything she'd encountered, a chaotic blend of geometric shapes and swirling, almost biological forms. She felt a growing unease, a primal fear coiling in her stomach, whispering of ancient, unknowable powers. Anything? Elias's voice, amplified by the cavern's acoustics, echoed around them. He was examining a series of deep, unnatural grooves carved into the cave wall, their edges impossibly sharp. Ramirez shook her head, her voice a strained whisper. No, not yet. But this feels different. Wrong, somehow. The unsettling pulsating of the glyphs intensified, casting flickering shadows that danced across the cave walls like grotesque marionettes. Elias stepped back from the grooves, a look of dawning horror on his face. These aren't tool marks, Maria, he said, his voice trembling slightly. These are surgical. He pointed to the smooth, almost polished interior of the grooves. Look, they're too precise, too organic. Like something was extracted. Ramirez's breath hitched. She remembered the skeletal remains, the missing sections of bone. A horrifying thought began to take root. Suddenly, a low, resonant hum filled the air, emanating from the heart of the glyphs. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and dust rained down from the cavern ceiling. Ramirez and Elias clung to each other, their faces pale with terror. The green light intensified, blinding them momentarily. When their vision cleared, a shimmering, translucent figure stood before them. It was humanoid in form, but elongated and impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed to bend at unnatural angles. Its skin was a sickly, translucent gray, revealing the pulsating network of veins and arteries beneath. Large, black eyes, devoid of pupils, stared at them with chilling indifference. Ramirez felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The creature radiated an aura of ancient power, of something both utterly alien and disturbingly familiar. It spoke, but not with sound. The communication was direct, a chilling intrusion into their minds, bypassing language altogether. We are the architects. Asterisk. The words echoed in their minds, cold and sterile, devoid of any emotion. Elias stumbled back, his eyes wide with fear. Ramirez, however, found herself rooted to the spot, a strange fascination battling with the overwhelming terror. You seek understanding. We will show you. Asterisk. The figure gestured towards the glyphs, and they flared with an even brighter light. Images began to flicker across their surface, scenes of unimaginable age and power. Ramirez saw swirling nebulae collapsing into stars, the birth of planets, the slow, inexorable crawl of evolution. Then, the images shifted, becoming more disturbing. She saw strange, biomechanical constructs manipulating genetic material, twisting and reshaping DNA strands with chilling precision. She saw the first humans, crude and primitive, their bodies scarred and altered by the architect's interventions. They were experiments, tools, designed for a purpose Ramirez couldn't yet comprehend. We shaped you. We guided your evolution. Asterisk. The voice echoed in their minds again, cold and dispassionate. We gave you the spark of intelligence, the potential for greatness. But you are not yet complete. Asterisk. Ramirez saw images of future horrors, of genetic manipulations gone wrong, of monstrous creations born from the architect's meddling. She saw humanity twisted and warped into grotesque parodies of its former self. The cycle continues. Asterisk. The figure raised its hand, its long, slender fingers pointing towards Elias. A beam of green light shot out, striking him in the chest. He screamed, a high-pitched, animalistic sound that reverberated through the cavern. His body convulsed, his bones twisting and reshaping beneath his skin. Ramirez watched in horror as he transformed before her eyes, his features becoming elongated, his skin turning the same sickly gray as the architect. The transformation was swift and brutal, Elias's screams fading into whimpers as he lost all semblance of humanity. He stood there, a grotesque mockery of his former self, his black, pupil-less eyes staring blankly ahead. He is now one of us. Asterisk. The architect turned its gaze to Ramirez, its cold, alien eyes boring into her soul. You will be next. Asterisk. The green light intensified, and Ramirez braced herself for the inevitable. She closed her eyes, a single, defiant thought echoing in her mind. Not if I can help it. Asterisk. To be continued? What if ancient aliens created the human species? Part 4. The dust motes danced in a single shaft of sunlight piercing the gloom of the archive. Dr. Aris Thorne shivered, though the temperature was comfortably cool. The silence, broken only by the rustling of ancient parchment as he turned a page, was a suffocating blanket. He felt observed, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck that no amount of rationalization could dispel. The feeling had intensified since his discovery of the Sumerian cylinder seal, its intricate carvings hinting at a horrifying truth. The seal depicted elongated figures with large, almond-shaped eyes, performing what looked eerily like genetic manipulation on a smaller, hominid form. It was a scene that echoed the disturbingly consistent narratives found across disparate cultures. Gods descending from the sky, creating humankind in their image. Myths, he had always believed. Until now. He pushed his glasses back up his nose, the metal cold against his skin. The cuneiform text surrounding the image, painstakingly translated, spoke of the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. It detailed their arrival, their need for workers to mine gold, and their subsequent creation of humans, Lulu, the primitive worker. The text even hinted at a catastrophic event, a great flood that wiped out most of humanity, a flood suspiciously reminiscent of the biblical deluge. The deeper Aris delved, the more the pieces fit together, forming a disturbing mosaic. The seemingly random placement of ancient megalithic structures, their astronomical alignments, the sudden leaps in human evolution, all pointed towards a guiding, extraterrestrial hand. But why? What was their ultimate goal? The text remained frustratingly vague, filled with cryptic symbolism and veiled references. He felt like a man staring at a complex lock, possessing only a fraction of the key. Suddenly, the archive door creaked open, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Aris jumped, his heart hammering against his ribs. He spun around, expecting to see, he didn't know what. A shadowy figure? One of the elongated beings from the seal? Instead, it was Professor Albright, his mentor, his face etched with concern. Aris, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Aris managed a weak smile. Just engrossed in my work. It's fascinating. Albright approached the table, his eyes falling on the cylinder seal. His expression shifted from concern to something akin to fear. Where did you find this? He whispered, his voice barely audible. In the restricted section, Aris replied, a knot tightening in his stomach. Albright's reaction confirmed his fears. This was more than just an academic curiosity. This was dangerous. You shouldn't be looking at this, Aris. Some things are best left buried. But why? Don't you see? This could change everything we know about our history, about ourselves. Albright sighed, his shoulders slumping. He looked bolder, wearier than Aris had ever seen him. Some truths, he said, his voice heavy with resignation, are better left undisturbed. This knowledge can be a curse, Aris. Believe me. He reached out and placed a hand on Aris's shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. Forget what you've seen. Forget what you think you know. For your own good. But Aris couldn't forget. The seed of doubt, once planted, had taken root, its tendrils wrapping around his mind, choking out all other thoughts. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that Albright was hiding something. And he was determined to uncover it. That night, Aris couldn't sleep. The images from the cylinder seal danced behind his eyelids, the cuneiform text whispering in his ears. He felt a strange pull, a compulsion to return to the archive, to delve deeper into the forbidden knowledge. He snuck out of his apartment, the city streets eerily deserted. The archive loomed before him, a dark monolith against the night sky. He slipped inside, the familiar musty smell enveloping him. He made his way to the restricted section, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He found the shelf where he had discovered the seal. He ran his fingers along the dusty spines, searching for, he didn't know what. Something more, something that would explain the Anunnaki, their motives, their ultimate fate. Suddenly, his hand brushed against something smooth and cold. He pulled it out. It was a small, obsidian box, intricately carved with the same elongated figures as the seal. His heart pounded in his chest. He hesitated for a moment, a sense of foreboding washing over him. But the allure of the unknown was too strong. He carefully opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of crimson velvet, lay a single, smooth, black stone. It pulsed with a faint, internal light, casting an unsettling glow on Aris's face. As he reached out to touch it, a voice echoed in his mind, cold and ancient, speaking in a language he didn't understand, yet somehow, he knew exactly what it meant. "We have been waiting for you, asterisk. What if ancient aliens created the human species?" Part 5. The chilling revelation within the glyphs, hinting at humanity being a mere livestock species for these celestial beings, hung heavy in the air, a suffocating shroud. Professor Armitage, pale and visibly shaken, traced the intricate carvings with a trembling finger. The silence in the cavern was thick, broken only by the drip 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 of water echoing through the vast, subterranean space. "A harvest," he whispered, the word catching in his throat. "They see us as a harvest." Daniel, ever the pragmatist, shifted his weight. But why? What could they possibly gain from harvesting us? Amelia, her face etched with a growing horror, pointed to a series of glyphs depicting strange, elongated instruments being used on stylized human figures. It looks like extraction. They're taking something from us." The images were disturbingly clinical, devoid of any emotion. They showed the beings, tall and slender with large, obsidian eyes, systematically removing something from the humans. It wasn't clear what. Organs? Fluids? Something more ethereal? "My God," breathed Elias, the theologian of the group. "It's like we're crops in their cosmic field." A wave of nausea washed over me. The idea was too monstrous, too alien to comprehend. We prided ourselves on being the pinnacle of evolution, the masters of our domain. But if these glyphs were to be believed, we were nothing more than cattle, fattened for an unknown purpose. We spent the next few hours painstakingly documenting the remaining glyphs. Each new discovery chipped away at our sanity, revealing more and more of this horrifying truth. There were depictions of vast, underground chambers filled with humans in suspended animation, their bodies connected to a network of pulsating tubes. There were scenes of strange rituals, where the beings seemed to be absorbing a glowing energy emanating from the humans. The more we learned, the more we realized the depth of our ignorance. We were trapped in a cosmic horror story, the protagonists in a nightmare we hadn't even known existed. The cavern, once a place of awe and wonder, now felt like a tomb. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the cavern entrance, a new discovery sent a shiver of pure dread through us. It was a series of glyphs unlike any we had seen before. They depicted a celestial event, a conjunction of planets, forming a specific alignment in the night sky. Professor Armitage, his voice strained with fear, pointed to a small, almost insignificant symbol etched beneath the celestial alignment. This is the symbol for harvest," he stammered. "And this," he pointed to a series of markings that resembled a calendar. "This is a date." He quickly calculated, his hands shaking so badly that he could barely hold the charcoal pencil. "It corresponds to 3 months from now." The implication hit us like a physical blow. The harvest wasn't a thing of the distant past. It was imminent. These beings, these cosmic farmers, were returning. A suffocating silence descended upon the group. The dripping water suddenly seemed louder, each drop a chilling reminder of the dwindling time. We were no longer just researchers. We were marked. We were next. That night, we returned to the camp, the weight of our discovery pressing down on us. The familiar comfort of the fire offered no solace. The crackling flames seemed to mock our helplessness, their flickering light painting grotesque shadows on the surrounding trees. Sleep was a distant impossibility. Every rustle of leaves, every hoot of an owl, sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept seeing the glyphs, the cold, clinical depictions of our impending doom, replaying in my mind. The following days were spent in a feverish attempt to decipher the remaining glyphs, hoping to find some clue, some way to avert the impending harvest. But each new piece of the puzzle only deepened the horror. We learned that the harvest wasn't a singular event, but a cyclical process, repeating every few millennia. We were just another crop, ripe for the picking. We also discovered that the beings weren't simply taking something from us. They were also leaving something behind, a genetic marker, a subtle alteration to our DNA. A chilling thought occurred to me. What if the gifts of civilization, the sudden leaps in human evolution, weren't acts of divine intervention or natural progression? What if they were merely byproducts of their genetic manipulation, designed to make us a more efficient, more productive crop? The dread gnawed at us, a constant, unrelenting pressure. We knew we had to tell the world, to warn them. But who would believe us? We had no proof beyond the glyphs, and even those could be dismissed as elaborate hoaxes. And what good would a warning do? How could we possibly defend ourselves against beings with such advanced technology? As the date of the celestial alignment drew closer, a palpable sense of doom settled over the camp. We were trapped, caught in the crosshairs of a cosmic horror, waiting for the reapers to return. And in the dead of night, under the cold, indifferent gaze of the stars, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. That they were already here, watching us, waiting for the harvest moon to rise. What if ancient aliens created the human species? Part 6. The chanting intensified, resonating through the damp earth and up into my bones. I pressed myself tighter against the rough-hewn tunnel wall, the cold stone a stark contrast to the feverish heat spreading through my veins. The glyphs, glowing with a sickly, phosphorescent green, pulsed in time with the chanting, casting grotesque shadows that danced like phantoms across the cavern walls. They seemed to writhe, to shift and change before my very eyes, telling a story I desperately didn't want to understand. Dr. Albright, seemingly oblivious to my terror, was entranced. He stood at the center of the circular chamber, bathed in the unnerving green light, his arms outstretched as if embracing the energy. His eyes, wide and unblinking, reflected the glyphs like twin, glowing orbs. The transformation that had begun in the jungle was complete. He no longer resembled the man I'd known, the brilliant but eccentric anthropologist. His skin had taken on a grayish hue, stretched tight across his prominent cheekbones. His lips, pulled back in a rictus grin, revealed teeth that seemed elongated, almost sharpened. He's changing, I whispered, more to myself than to Elena, who was crouched beside me, her face ashen and streaked with dirt. She nodded, her eyes fixed on Albright, a single tear tracing a clean line through the grime on her cheek. We have to get out of here. But the chanting held us captive, an invisible force pressing down on us, stealing the very air from our lungs. The ground began to tremble, a low, guttural rumble that vibrated up through our bodies. From the shadows around the edge of the chamber, things began to move. At first, they were just flickers in my peripheral vision, distortions in the already distorted light. But then, as the chanting reached a fever pitch, they materialized. Tall, skeletal figures, their skin the color of parchment stretched over bone, emerged from the darkness. Their eyes, empty sockets filled with the same sickening green light as the glyphs, burned into me. They were humanoid, but elongated, grotesque parodies of human form. Their limbs were impossibly thin, ending in hands with long, spindly fingers tipped with claws that glinted in the unearthly glow. The creatures formed a circle around Albright, their movements slow and deliberate, almost ritualistic. He raised his hands above his head, and the chanting intensified, becoming a deafening roar that echoed through the chamber, through the very earth itself. Elena screamed. It was a high-pitched, desperate sound that was swallowed by the chanting. I clapped my hands over her mouth, terrified that the sound would draw the creature's attention. One of them, closer than I'd realized, turned its head towards us, its empty sockets fixing on our position. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs, praying it hadn't seen us. After what felt like an eternity, it slowly turned back to Albright. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me weak. But it was short-lived. Albright began to speak, his voice no longer his own. It was a deep, guttural rasp, the language alien and incomprehensible, yet chillingly familiar, echoing the rhythm of the chanting. As he spoke, the glyphs on the walls pulsed faster, the light growing brighter, more intense. The ground trembled violently, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. One of the creatures stepped forward, its long, clawed fingers reaching out to Albright. It touched his forehead, and a bolt of green energy arced between them. Albright convulsed, his body arching backwards, his screams swallowed by the chanting. The creatures began to move again, their movements now frantic, almost frenzied. They circled Albright, their chanting reaching a crescendo. The ground beneath us shook so violently that I feared the entire chamber would collapse. Elena sobbed silently beside me, her body trembling uncontrollably. I knew we had to escape. But how? The chanting, the creatures, the sheer terror of it all held us paralyzed. Then, a crack appeared in the wall behind us, a fissure splitting the stone from floor to ceiling. Dust and debris cascaded down, momentarily obscuring the horrific scene in the center of the chamber. It was our chance. I grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her towards the crack. We scrambled through the narrow opening, the crumbling stones scraping against our skin. We stumbled into another tunnel, smaller and darker than the last. We didn't stop running. Behind us, the chanting continued, echoing through the tunnels, a constant reminder of the horrors we had witnessed. But now, another sound joined the chanting, a deep, rhythmic thumping, growing louder with each passing moment. It sounded like a heartbeat. A massive, inhuman heartbeat. And it was getting closer. Part 7. The Whispers of the Deep. The symbols, now seared into my mind, haunted my waking thoughts and invaded my dreams. Spiraling glyphs, interconnected by lines thinner than spider silk, pulsed with a sickly, otherworldly luminescence. They whispered, not in any language I understood, but in a way that resonated deep within my bones, a primal vibration that unsettled my very being. I tried to distract myself. I returned to my mundane routine at the university, lecturing on the intricacies of Mesopotamia's ancient history, but the words felt hollow, meaningless against the backdrop of the vast, cosmic truth I now glimpsed. My students' inquisitive faces seemed blurred, distant. Even the familiar comfort of the dusty archives, usually a sanctuary, now felt oppressive, the silence amplifying the whispers in my head. Professor Armitage, however, noticed my change. He found me one afternoon staring blankly at a cuneiform tablet, the symbols swirling before my eyes. He put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Elias," he said, his voice filled with concern, "you look dreadful. This obsession, it's consuming you." I wanted to tell him, to share the burden of this terrifying knowledge. But the words wouldn't come. How could I explain the humming beneath my skin, the feeling of being watched, not by human eyes, but by something vast, ancient, and utterly indifferent to our existence? "It's nothing," I mumbled, turning away from his concerned gaze. "Just fatigue." He didn't believe me, I could see it in his eyes, but he let it go, patting my shoulder once more before walking away. That night, the whispers intensified. They seemed to emanate from the ocean, a low, guttural drone that vibrated through the floorboards of my apartment. Sleep was impossible. I paced the room, the symbols dancing before my eyes, mocking my helplessness. Driven by an unseen force, I found myself back at the cliffside overlooking the churning black water. The moon hung heavy in the sky, casting a silver sheen across the waves. The air was thick with salt and something else, something ancient and alien. I saw it then, barely visible against the dark horizon. A shape, vast and amorphous, rising slowly from the depths. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a swirling mass of darkness that defied description. It pulsed with the same unsettling luminescence as the glyphs, a slow, rhythmic beat that echoed the whispers in my mind. Terror, raw and primal, gripped me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my limbs felt heavy, my voice trapped in my throat. I was rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the horrifying spectacle unfolding before me. As the shape drew closer, the whispers became louder, more insistent. They no longer felt random, but purposeful, directed. I understood then, with a chilling certainty, that they were communicating. Not with me, but through me. My body began to tremble uncontrollably. The symbols on my skin burned, radiating an intense heat. I felt a tearing sensation inside my head, as if something was trying to break free. Then, a voice, cold and resonant, echoed within my skull. It spoke not in words, but in concepts, in images, in the raw, unfiltered essence of existence. It spoke of epics beyond comprehension, of cosmic horrors that dwarfed human understanding. It spoke of the creation, and the purpose, of our species. We were not created in God's image, the voice revealed. We were engineered, crafted by these ancient entities for a purpose we could not fathom. We were a tool, a resource, an experiment. And the time for the harvest was approaching. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I staggered back, gasping for breath. The shape in the ocean had vanished, leaving only the churning black water and the echoing whispers of the deep. I stumbled away from the cliff edge, my mind reeling from the revelation. The symbols on my skin pulsed with a malevolent energy. I was no longer just a researcher, a historian. I was a vessel, a conduit for something ancient and terrifying. And I knew, with a sinking dread, that I was not alone. Others had been chosen, marked with the same symbols, scattered across the globe, unwitting participants in a cosmic horror that was about to unfold. The whispers followed me home, clinging to me like a shroud. They promised power, knowledge, and a glimpse into the true nature of reality. But they also whispered of oblivion, of a fate far worse than death. And as I lay in the darkness, trembling with fear and anticipation, I knew that my life, and perhaps the fate of humanity, had irrevocably changed. What if ancient aliens created the human species? Part 8. The humming intensified, vibrating the very marrow in my bones. The glyphs on the obsidian wall pulsed with a cold, internal light, like veins filled with liquid starlight. Elias, face pale and drawn, traced the symbols with a trembling finger, muttering translations that sounded more like incantations. They called themselves the architects, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the pervasive hum. And this place, it's not a temple. It's a nursery. My breath caught. A nursery? For what? He pointed to a large, circular depression in the center of the chamber. It was filled with a viscous, shimmering fluid, its surface undulating gently as if something breathed beneath. The hum seemed to emanate from it. A primordial soup, Elias said, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. The building blocks of life, manipulated, accelerated, perfected. Suddenly, a ripple disturbed the surface of the fluid. A shape began to coalesce, rising slowly, like a grotesque parody of birth. It was humanoid, but elongated, its limbs too thin, its head too large, its skin a translucent gray. Its eyes, huge and black, fixed on us with an unnerving intensity. We stumbled back, our primal fear overriding any semblance of scientific curiosity. The creature, still partially submerged, opened its mouth, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. A high-pitched, keening sound escaped its lips, a sound that scraped against the edges of sanity. It's one of the prototypes, Elias stammered, his voice choked with fear. An early iteration, discarded. The creature lurched forward, its thin limbs surprisingly strong. It pulled itself out of the pool, the viscous fluid clinging to its skin like a second, grotesque membrane. The humming intensified, and the glyphs on the wall blazed with an almost blinding light. We scrambled back, our hearts pounding against our ribs like trapped birds. The creature, its movements jerky and unnatural, stalked towards us. The keening sound grew louder, morphing into a series of guttural clicks and whistles. "We have to get out of here," I yelled, my voice echoing in the cavernous chamber. Elias, paralyzed by fear, could only point to a small passageway hidden behind a curtain of stalactites. We ran, the creature's wails echoing behind us. The passage was narrow and low, forcing us to crawl on our hands and knees. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something ancient and alien. We emerged into another chamber, smaller than the first, but equally unsettling. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, depicting scenes of bizarre experimentation and what looked suspiciously like vivisection. In the center of the room, a single pedestal held a crystalline object, pulsating with a soft, blue light. "What is that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Elias, his breathing ragged, approached the pedestal cautiously. He reached out and touched the crystal. The moment his fingers made contact, a wave of energy surged through the room. Images flashed through my mind, fragmented and disorienting. I saw vast, star-faring vessels, alien landscapes bathed in the light of twin suns, and beings of unimaginable power manipulating the very fabric of life. I saw the architects, their forms shifting and shimmering, their intentions both benevolent and terrifyingly indifferent. I saw them seeding planets with life, experimenting with different forms, discarding failures without a second thought. I saw humanity, a carefully crafted species, destined for a purpose we could not comprehend. Then, just as suddenly, the vision ceased. Elias stumbled back, his eyes wide with horror. They created us," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "Not as children, but as tools. We are their experiment, their playthings." The chilling implication of his words hung heavy in the air. The humming, which had faded momentarily, returned with renewed intensity, resonating deep within us, a constant reminder of our engineered existence. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The creature's keening echoed through the passageway, growing closer. We were trapped, cornered in this ancient nursery, the horrifying truth of our origins laid bare. "We have to find another way out," I said, my voice laced with a desperate urgency. Elias pointed to a narrow fissure in the wall, almost hidden behind a tapestry depicting a grotesque hybrid creature. Maybe through there, he stammered. We squeezed through the fissure, the rough stone scraping against our skin. The passage beyond was dark and claustrophobic, the air thick with the smell of decay. The creature's wails grew louder, closer. We were running out of time. As we stumbled through the darkness, I couldn't shake the chilling realization that we were not just exploring an ancient ruin. We were navigating the very womb of our creation, a place where the lines between science and horror blurred into a terrifying, inescapable reality. And the architects, our creators, were still out there, watching, waiting. For what? That was the most terrifying question of all. What if ancient aliens created the human species? Part 9. The drone of the chanting grew louder, resonating deep within my bones. My fingers, still slick with the viscous, metallic fluid from the artifact, trembled as I clutched Alina's hand. We were deeper in the complex now, the claustrophobic corridors twisting and turning like a maddening labyrinth. The flickering emergency lights cast elongated, dancing shadows that mimicked grotesque, inhuman forms on the walls. The carvings became more frequent, more intricate. No longer simple depictions of celestial bodies, they now showcased scenes of transformation. Humans, or beings that looked disturbingly like early hominids, were depicted being contorted, reshaped, their bodies melding with otherworldly instruments and strange, pulsating energies. One particularly vivid carving showed a figure strapped to a table-like structure, its chest cavity open, while several tall, slender figures, their faces obscured by masks resembling avian skulls, manipulated its internal organs with what looked like glowing probes. Elena whimpered, squeezing my hand tighter. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. I felt it too, a cold dread that seeped into my very core. These weren't just carvings, they were a chronicle, a surgical record of our creation, our mutilation. We need to get out of here, Elena whispered, her voice strained. I nodded, but my feet felt like lead. The chanting was pulling us forward, an irresistible siren call. We followed the sound, the corridor opening into a vast, cavernous chamber. The sight that greeted us stole my breath. The chamber was circular, its walls covered in the same pulsating, bioluminescent moss we had seen earlier. But here, it wasn't just moss. It formed patterns, symbols that shifted and writhed like living things. In the center of the chamber, a raised platform dominated the space. And on that platform, the chanting reached its crescendo. Bathed in the eerie green light, a figure stood, its back to us. It was tall, impossibly slender, and clad in a flowing robe of what appeared to be woven metal. Its arms were raised, and in its hands, it held a skull, a human skull, polished to a gleaming white. As the figure slowly turned, I felt my blood run cold. Its face was elongated, almost skeletal, the skin stretched taut over high cheekbones. Its eyes, large and black, burned with an otherworldly intensity. But it was the mouth that truly horrified me. It was a thin, lipless slit that stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. The creature, for it could be nothing else, lowered its arms, the skull dangling between its long, spindly fingers. It opened its mouth, and a voice, raspy and resonant, filled the chamber. The language was unlike anything I had ever heard, but somehow, I understood. Welcome, children, it said, its voice echoing off the cavern walls. Welcome to your birthplace, Elena screamed, a raw, primal sound of terror. I wanted to scream too, to run, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The creature took a step forward, its eyes fixed on us. You have sought knowledge, it continued, its voice dripping with a chilling amusement. And knowledge you shall receive. It gestured towards the pulsating symbols on the walls. This is the story of your genesis. The story of how we, the architects, molded you from the clay of this world. The symbols began to swirl and coalesce, forming images that danced across the chamber walls. We saw scenes of early Earth, a primordial soup of life teeming with strange, alien creatures. Then, the arrival of the architects, their ships descending from the heavens like fiery gods. We saw them experimenting, splicing, manipulating the genetic code of the planet's inhabitants, searching for the perfect vessel. And then, we saw us. Early humans, crude and primitive, but with the spark of intelligence flickering in their eyes. The creature stepped closer, its shadow looming over us. We uplifted you, it hissed, its voice laced with a condescending pride. We gave you consciousness, awareness. We made you in our image. It held up the skull, its empty sockets seeming to stare directly into my soul. But you were flawed, imperfect. A work in progress. My mind reeled. The chanting, the carvings, the creature, it was all true. We weren't the product of natural evolution. We were an experiment, a creation of these monsters. And now, the creature continued, its voice rising to a fever pitch, the experiment continues. It reached out a long, skeletal finger, pointing directly at me. You will be the next step. You will show us the true potential of our creation. Elena sobbed, pulling at my arm. We have to go, now. But it was too late. The pulsating symbols on the walls intensified, their light flooding the chamber. I felt a searing pain in my head, my vision blurring. The chanting grew louder, drowning out Elena's cries. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that our fate was sealed. The architects had returned, and we were theirs to command. What if ancient aliens created the human species? Part 10. The humming intensified, vibrating through the very bones of the bunker. Alara pressed her hands against the cold concrete wall, the rhythmic pulsing mirroring the frantic beat of her heart. Dr. Menzies, his face a mask of morbid fascination, adjusted the dials on the antiquated oscilloscope, the green line dancing erratically across the screen. It's evolving, he whispered, his voice hoarse. The signal, it's becoming more complex. The unearthed artifact, the one that had triggered this whole nightmare, pulsed with an eerie internal light. It was a perfect sphere of obsidian-like material, veined with shimmering gold, humming like a morbid heart. Ever since they'd started deciphering the fragmented messages within the monolith discovered at the dig site, the sphere had begun to react. The glyphs, Alara stammered, pointing to the projected images of the ancient cave paintings. They're changing. The ochre and charcoal figures on the cave wall, once depicting stick figure humans hunting mammoth, were morphing. The mammoth remained, but the hunters were elongating, their limbs thinning, their heads becoming grotesquely oversized. New appendages, thin and writhing like tentacles, sprouted from their backs. The painted figures seemed to writhe in silent agony, their expressions twisting into masks of terror. A chill colder than the bunker's recycled air swept through Alara. These weren't just crude drawings. They were becoming prophecies. They're showing us what's next, Menzies muttered, a sheen of sweat on his brow. They're showing us the redesign. The bunker's heavy steel door hissed open, and Sergeant Miller stumbled in, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. Sir, Dr. Menzies, you need to see this. He led them down a sterile corridor, the humming of the sphere echoing ominously. They reached the observation deck overlooking the main excavation site, now bathed in the eerie glow of powerful floodlights. The ground was moving. Not shaking, as in an earthquake, but rippling, undulating like a disturbed pool of water. The dig site, painstakingly excavated over months, was bubbling, the earth itself seeming to boil. Then, the first one emerged. It was humanoid, but elongated, its limbs grotesquely thin, its head disproportionately large. Its skin was a sickly pale gray, translucent, revealing a network of pulsating veins beneath. From its back sprouted the same writhing tentacles depicted in the evolving cave paintings. It moved with a disconcerting fluidity, its head twitching, as if searching for something. Another followed, then another, and another, until a dozen of these nightmarish creatures stood silhouetted against the floodlights. They resembled the mutated figures in the cave paintings with unnerving accuracy. They're real, Alara whispered, her voice barely audible. Menzies let out a choked sob. The signal, it's a blueprint. A genetic rewrite. They're changing us. Sergeant Miller, his hand trembling, raised his rifle. We have to stop them. But before anyone could react, one of the creatures let out a piercing shriek, a sound that resonated deep within their skulls, a sound that seemed to bypass their ears and burrow directly into their brains. Alara clutched her head, a searing pain erupting behind her eyes. The shriek echoed across the excavation site, causing the remaining earth to churn violently. Dozens, then hundreds, of the creatures crawled out of the bubbling ground, their thin limbs scrabbling at the earth, their oversized heads swiveling. Fall back, Miller yelled, firing a burst from his rifle. The bullets tore through the translucent flesh of one of the creatures, but it seemed unfazed, its movements only slightly faltering. It turned towards Miller, its large, black eyes fixated on him, and let out another ear-splitting shriek. Miller screamed, dropping his rifle, clutching his head. He stumbled back, his eyes rolling back in his head, his body convulsing. His skin began to shimmer, to ripple, taking on the same sickly pale gray hue as the creature's. Alara watched in horror as Sergeant Miller, a seasoned soldier, a man of strength and resilience, transformed before her eyes. His limbs thinned, his head swelled, and from his back, thin, writhing tentacles began to sprout. The transformation was complete in a matter of seconds. Miller, or what was left of him, turned towards Alara, his now oversized black eyes devoid of recognition. He opened his mouth, and from his throat came the same piercing shriek that had heralded his transformation. Alara knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. The ancient architects had returned, and their redesign of humanity was underway. The earth itself had become their crucible, and humanity, their unwilling clay. The humming of the sphere intensified, a morbid lullaby for the end of the world as they knew it. Escape felt impossible, a futile dream in the face of this waking nightmare. The ancient aliens were reclaiming their creation, and humanity was paying the price. Part 11. The Whispers of Creation. The glyphs pulsed with a sickly green light, casting long, distorted shadows across the cavern floor. Elena traced the alien script with a trembling finger, the cold stone biting into her skin. The hum that had permeated the air since they entered the chamber intensified, vibrating deep within her bones. Daniel, his face pale and drawn, sat hunched over a collection of scattered parchments, translated fragments of the ancient alien language painstakingly pieced together by his grandfather. "It's a creation myth," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the droning hum. "But, twisted, they didn't create us from dust, Elena. They molded us from something else." Elena shuddered. The glyphs seemed to writhe before her eyes, the green light intensifying, making her head swim. She recalled the grotesque forms they had seen preserved within the crystalline pods, the intermediary stages. Daniel had called them, the failed attempts at perfecting the human form. What else?" she asked, her voice catching in her throat. Daniel shook his head, his eyes fixated on the parchment. "It speaks of a primordial ooze, a living clay. Found deep within this planet, they say. A substance capable of holding the spark of life, but without form, without purpose." He looked up, his gaze meeting hers. "They shaped it, Elena. Sculpted us in their image. But the glyphs, they suggest the process was imperfect. Unstable." A wave of nausea swept over Elena. The images from the pods flashed before her eyes, distorted limbs, elongated skulls, vacant, soulless eyes. She thought of the rising tide of violence, the inexplicable mutations plaguing the world. Were these the imperfections the glyphs spoke of? The consequences of a flawed creation? "There's more," Daniel continued, his voice strained. "They speak of a failsafe, a mechanism embedded within our very being, designed to correct the imperfections. To reset the process, if necessary." Elena's blood ran cold. "Reset? What does that mean?" He pointed to a specific glyph, a spiral surrounded by sharp, angular lines. It pulsed with an almost malevolent energy. "This, they call it the Great Call. A trigger, activated when the divergence from the intended design reaches a critical threshold." The droning hum swelled into a cacophony, the green light now pulsating in time with the erratic beating of Elena's heart. The cavern felt as if it were shrinking, closing in around them. She felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread, a primal fear that resonated deep within her soul. "What triggers it, Daniel?" She clutched his arm, her fingers digging into his skin. He swallowed hard. "The glyphs, they're vague. They speak of a signal, a beacon transmitted across the cosmos, activating the failsafe within us." "A signal?" Elena repeated, her voice a choked whisper. "From where?" Daniel's gaze shifted towards the cavern ceiling, his eyes widening with horror. "Look." Elena followed his gaze. A section of the cavern ceiling shimmered, then dissolved, revealing a swirling vortex of stars, an impossible window into the depths of space. Within the vortex, a single point of light intensified, growing brighter with each passing second. It pulsed with a cold, alien energy, a light that felt both ancient and terrifyingly familiar. "It's them," Daniel whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. "They're back." The beacon pulsed again, and Elena felt a searing pain behind her eyes. The glyphs on the cavern walls blazed with an unbearable light, burning themselves onto her retinas. She stumbled back, clutching her head, a scream building in her throat. The hum, now a deafening roar, seemed to penetrate every cell in her body. She saw Daniel collapse to his knees, his hands pressed against his ears, his body convulsing. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound that was more animal than human. The light intensified, engulfing the cavern in its cold embrace. Elena felt a strange pressure building within her, a force pushing outwards, tearing at her from the inside. She looked down at her hands, watching in horror as her skin began to ripple, to shift, to change. Her fingernails elongated into sharp claws, her fingers twisting into grotesque, alien shapes. The pain was unbearable, but beneath the agony, something else was stirring. A cold, alien consciousness, ancient and vast, was pushing its way into her mind, supplanting her thoughts, her memories, her very being. She opened her mouth to scream, but the sound that emerged was inhuman, a chilling, alien shriek that echoed through the cavern, a harbinger of the great cull. The beacon pulsed one final time, and the cavern plunged into darkness. The whispers of creation had given way to the screams of annihilation. What if ancient aliens created the human species? Part 12. The humming intensified, vibrating deep within Alara's bones. The glyphs on the obelisk pulsed with an eerie, internal light, as though mimicking the rhythm of some gigantic, unseen heart. The wind, which had been a low moan moments before, died completely, leaving an unnatural silence broken only by the pulsing and the blood rushing in her ears. She glanced back at Father Mateo, his face a mask of terror, frozen mid-prayer. He looked smaller now, frail and insignificant against the backdrop of the colossal obelisk and the oppressive, expectant silence. Alara reached out, drawn by an unseen force, her fingers tracing the grooves of the alien script. A jolt of pure energy surged through her arm, a cascade of images flooding her mind. Visions of swirling nebulae, of colossal beings moving through the cosmos with effortless grace, of planets being sculpted, life being seeded. And then, humanity, not created, but molded. Clay in the hands of titans. But the visions weren't celebratory. They were tinged with disappointment. A cold, analytical assessment of a failed experiment. Alara saw fleeting glimpses of other humanoid forms, different, more advanced. Taller, with elongated limbs and larger skulls, their eyes shimmering with an alien intelligence. They were the predecessors, the prototypes deemed unsatisfactory, discarded in favor of humanity, the next iteration. The humming escalated to a low drone, the ground trembling beneath their feet. The obelisk now glowed with an almost unbearable intensity, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed like specters. From the top, a beam of pure white light shot skyward, piercing the cloud cover and disappearing into the infinite expanse of space. Fear turned to a strange, detached fascination. Alara understood now. This wasn't a beacon calling them home. It was a signal, a report. And humanity, the flawed experiment, was the subject. Suddenly, the visions shifted, becoming sharper, more horrifying. She saw colossal ships descending from the heavens, not in peace, but in judgment. She saw cities crumbling, oceans boiling, the sky ablaze with fire. Not destruction in the traditional sense, but dissection. A methodical dismantling of a failed creation to analyze the defects, to learn from the mistakes. A voice, cold and resonant, echoed in her mind, not through her ears, but directly into her consciousness, bypassing language and resonating in the very core of her being. The assessment is complete. The deviation is unacceptable. Commence reclamation protocol Omega. The ground beneath them cracked, fissures spider webbing outwards from the base of the obelisk. The air crackled with an unseen energy, the very molecules seeming to vibrate in anticipation. Father Mateo screamed, a high-pitched, desperate wail swallowed by the growing drone. He scrambled backwards, his eyes wide with terror, tripping over a loose rock and falling heavily to the ground. Alara felt a strange sense of calm descend upon her, an acceptance of the inevitable. The visions continued, relentless, showing her the future, or rather, the lack thereof. Humanity, eradicated not through malice, but through clinical detachment, swept aside like a failed experiment. She saw herself, a fleeting image, a specimen pinned beneath a beam of light, dissected, analyzed, catalogued. Her essence, her memories, her very being, probed and examined by cold, unfeeling intellects. There would be no mercy, no salvation, only the cold, hard truth of their failure. Then, a new image flashed in her mind, a flicker of hope in the desolate landscape of the future. A small group, hidden deep beneath the earth, shielded from the probing eyes of the returning creators. They were different, changed, adapted. They possessed a unique resilience, a spark of defiance that had not been foreseen. The remnants, the survivors, the seeds of a new beginning. But the cost was immense. Billions sacrificed for the survival of a few. The knowledge of their creator's return, the weight of their judgment, etched into their very DNA, a constant reminder of their precarious existence. They lived in the shadows, whispering tales of the gods who returned not to embrace their creation, but to dismantle it. The drone intensified, becoming a physical force, pushing against Alara's chest, making it difficult to breathe. The obelisk pulsed with a blinding light, the fissures in the ground widening, revealing glimpses of a churning, molten red beneath. Alara closed her eyes, accepting her fate. She knew what was coming. The reclamation, the end of humanity as they knew it. But in the final moments, a single, defiant thought echoed in her mind. They wouldn't be erased. They would survive. They would adapt. They would remember. The light engulfed her, and the world went white. The humming ceased. The blinding light faded. The obelisk stood silent, its glyphs dormant once more. The wind picked up again, a mournful whisper through the desolate landscape. Father Mateo, lying on the ground, slowly opened his eyes, his gaze unfocused, his mind reeling from the unimaginable. He looked around, searching for Alara, but she was gone. Vanished without a trace. He staggered to his feet, his body trembling, his faith shattered. He looked at the obelisk, a monument to humanity's true origins, a chilling reminder of their impending doom. And then, he heard it. A faint whisper, carried on the wind, a voice not his own echoing in his mind. Reclamation Protocol Omega initiated. He fell to his knees, the weight of the revelation crushing him. He was alone. Humanity was alone. And the gods were returning. What if ancient aliens created the human species? Part 13. The glyphs pulsed with a sickly, internal light, bathing the chamber in a flickering emerald glow. Alara traced their intricate patterns with a trembling finger, the rough stone cold against her skin. They seemed to writhe beneath her touch, the energy making her teeth ache. Daniel, pale and silent, stood beside her, clutching the deactivated sonic resonator like a lifeline. The resonating hum that had plagued their descent had ceased abruptly when they'd entered this chamber, replaced by a chilling, expectant silence. This feels different, Alara whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the vast space. Daniel nodded, his eyes fixed on a colossal, obsidian structure at the center of the chamber. It resembled a distorted altar, its surface covered in the same pulsating glyphs. Cables, thick as pythons and shimmering with an oily, metallic sheen, snaked out from the altar, disappearing into the darkness that clung to the periphery of the chamber. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a static charge that prickled the skin. Do you think this is where they created us? Alara asked, the words catching in her throat. Daniel swallowed hard. I don't know, but something happened here. Something unnatural. He gestured towards the altar with the resonator. The energy readings are off the charts. It's like this place is a conduit for something else. A low, guttural growl echoed from the darkness, making Alara jump. Daniel spun around, the resonator held up defensively. The sound grew louder, accompanied by a wet, slithering noise. Slowly, a pair of luminous eyes emerged from the shadows. They were large, reptilian, and pulsed with the same unnerving emerald light as the glyphs. Then, more eyes appeared, dozens of them, reflecting the eerie glow. The creatures that bore them began to slither into the light, their forms grotesque and unsettling. They resembled enormous, hairless rats, their skin a sickly gray, their limbs elongated and twisted. Their snouts were pointed, filled with razor-sharp teeth, and their eyes held an ancient, chilling intelligence. Alara felt a scream building in her throat, but it died before it could escape. She was paralyzed with fear, her mind struggling to comprehend the horrors before her. What are they? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel shook his head, his face ashen. I don't know, but I don't think they're friendly. The creatures advanced, their growls intensifying. They moved with a disconcerting fluidity, their bodies rippling as they slithered across the floor. The largest of them, its eyes burning with malevolent intent, stopped before the altar, its head tilted as if in reverence. It emitted a high-pitched shriek, and the other creatures responded in kind, the cacophony echoing through the chamber. Suddenly, the glyphs on the altar flared brightly, bathing the chamber in an intense emerald light. The cables that snaked out from it began to pulsate, their metallic sheen intensifying. The air crackled with even more energy, and a strange, humming sound filled the air, similar to the one they had heard during their descent, but amplified, more powerful. Alara felt a sharp pain in her head, a searing agony that made her cry out. She clutched her temples, her vision blurring. She could hear Daniel shouting her name, but his voice sounded distant, distorted. The creature's shrieks grew louder, more frenzied, and the glyphs pulsed with a blinding light. Then, everything went white. When Alara's vision cleared, the chamber was silent. The emerald glow had faded, leaving the space dimly lit by their headlamps. The creatures were gone. The cables lay still, their metallic sheen dull. The glyphs on the altar no longer pulsed, but seemed etched deeper, more permanent. Daniel knelt beside her, his face etched with worry. "Alara, are you all right? What happened?" Alara sat up, her head throbbing. She looked around the chamber, a sense of unease settling over her. Something had changed, something fundamental. The air felt heavier, thicker, charged with an unsettling stillness. I don't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. I saw something." What did you see?" Daniel asked urgently. Alara closed her eyes, the images flashing behind her eyelids. The blinding light, the creature's shrieks, the pulsing glyphs, and then, a vision. A vision of colossal beings, shrouded in shadow, their forms barely discernible. They stood before the altar, their hands outstretched, manipulating the cables, channeling the energy. And in the center of the chamber, bathed in the emerald light, was a swirling mass of organic material, slowly taking shape, forming. Alara opened her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. She looked at Daniel, her face pale. They weren't creating us," she whispered, her voice filled with dread. "They were changing us." The chilling implication hung in the air, heavier than the silence that had descended upon the chamber. The creatures, the energy, the vision, it all pointed to something far more sinister than they could have ever imagined. They hadn't stumbled upon the birthplace of humanity. They had found the operating room. And the surgery, it seemed, wasn't over. What if ancient aliens created the human species? Part 14. The glyphs shimmered, their light pulsing in time with the thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath us. Alara, her face pale and drawn, translated haltingly. They call it the reckoning. A balancing. My blood ran cold. Balancing? What needed to be balanced? And how? The chamber, unearthed beneath the sprawling metropolis of Cairo, hummed with a power that was both ancient and terrifyingly modern. Hieroglyphs, unlike any we'd ever seen, snaked across the walls, pulsating with an eerie inner light. They weren't just telling a story, they were enacting one. Scenes of creation, of towering beings shaping clay, shifted into depictions of cataclysm, of fire raining from the sky and the earth cracking open like a rotten fruit. "There's more," Alara whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing thrum. They seeded worlds. Countless worlds. And now, they are harvesting. Harvesting. The word echoed in the cavernous chamber, bouncing off the cold stone walls and lodging itself deep within my mind. A chill deeper than the subterranean air settled over me. We weren't just studying history anymore. We were living it. We were part of it. Daniel, our tech specialist, pointed to a cluster of symbols that resembled a stylized constellation. This looks like a celestial map. But I can't identify any of these star systems. Professor Armitage, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination, traced the symbols with a trembling finger. They're not ours. They predate our understanding of the cosmos. This is a map of their empire. Suddenly, the thrumming intensified, and the hieroglyphs blazed with blinding light. We shielded our eyes, stumbling back as a low, resonant hum filled the air. The floor beneath us vibrated, and a section of the wall shimmered, then dissolved, revealing a passage leading deeper into the earth. The air pouring from the opening was cold, carrying a scent that was both metallic and strangely organic. It smelled alien. This This is it, Alara murmured, her eyes fixated on the passage. The path to the seed vault. The seed vault. The term had been mentioned in fragmented texts, whispered in hushed tones by ancient civilizations across the globe. A mythical place, a repository of life, a fail-safe against cosmic annihilation. Or so we thought. We stood at the precipice, the unknown stretching before us like a gaping maw. The urge to turn back, to flee back to the surface and pretend we'd never seen this, was almost overwhelming. But the pull of the unknown, the desperate need to understand, was stronger. We ventured into the darkness, our flashlights casting dancing shadows on the smooth, obsidian-like walls of the passage. The thrumming, now a constant presence, seemed to resonate within our very bones. The passage wound downwards, spiraling deeper and deeper into the earth. The air grew colder, thicker, and the metallic scent intensified, making it difficult to breathe. We passed chamber after chamber, each filled with strange, bioluminescent flora and intricate machinery that hummed with unseen energy. Finally, the passage opened into a vast cavern. The scale of it was breathtaking, dwarfing even the largest cathedrals. In the center of the cavern stood a colossal structure, pulsating with light and energy. It was shaped like a seed pod, its surface covered in the same pulsating glyphs we'd seen in the chamber above. The seed vault, Professor Armitage whispered, his voice filled with awe and dread. As we approached, we saw that the surface of the seed pod was not smooth but composed of thousands of smaller pods, each one containing a swirling, luminous substance. These were not seeds as we understood them. They were something else. Suddenly, a low, guttural voice echoed through the cavern. It spoke in a language none of us recognized, yet somehow, we understood. The harvest is ready. The smaller pods began to open, releasing the swirling, luminous substance into the cavern. The air shimmered, and figures began to coalesce from the light. Tall, slender beings with skin like polished silver and eyes that burned with an ancient, cold intelligence. They were the architects, the creators, the harvesters. And we were the crop. The lead being turned its gaze towards us, its eyes burning into our souls. A slow, chilling smile spread across its face. "Welcome," it said, its voice resonating with power and utter indifference. "The reckoning has begun. The next part will delve deeper into the reckoning and the true purpose of the seed vault. Will humanity be saved, or sacrificed? The chilling answer awaits in Part 15. Part 15. The Whispering Gallery. The pulsating light within the obsidian chamber deepened, bathing the hieroglyphs in a sickening violet hue. Alara traced the strange symbols with a trembling finger, her skin tingling where it made contact with the cold, smooth stone. The air thrummed with a low, almost sub-audible hum, a resonance that vibrated deep within her bones. Daniel, pale and silent, stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the shifting light. The feeling of being watched, of being studied, intensified, pressing down on them like a physical weight. This feels wrong," Alara whispered, her voice catching in her throat. The air tasted metallic, like blood. Daniel nodded, his jaw clenched. "It's like they're communicating, somehow." The pulsating intensified, and the hieroglyphs began to glow with an inner fire. Then, a voice, thin and reedy, like wind whistling through dry reeds, whispered from the walls. It wasn't a language they recognized, yet somehow, the meaning seeped into their minds, a chillingly invasive intrusion. "We see you, asterisk." Alara recoiled, stumbling back against Daniel. He steadied her, his eyes wide with terror. "We know you, asterisk." The whispers multiplied, echoing and overlapping, creating a cacophony of disembodied voices that seemed to emanate from the very stone itself. The walls of the chamber seemed to shift and writhe, the hieroglyphs morphing into grotesque, alien faces that stared at them with vacant, obsidian eyes. "You are not what you seem, asterisk." Daniel gripped Alara's hand, his knuckles white. He tried to speak, but only a strangled gasp escaped his lips. The whispers intensified, the voices growing louder, more insistent, wrapping around them like a suffocating shroud. "You carry the seed, asterisk." Alara felt a sharp, stabbing pain in her head, a blinding flash of light exploding behind her eyes. She saw fleeting images, a vast, star-filled expanse, swirling nebulae, and a colossal, biomechanical structure that dwarfed planets. Then, a close-up of a gray, elongated face with enormous, black eyes that seemed to pierce through her very soul. The image vanished, leaving her gasping for breath, the taste of blood thick in her mouth. The whispering subsided, replaced by a low, guttural humming. The walls returned to their static state, the hieroglyphs once again inert, yet the sense of dread lingered, thick and heavy in the air. What was that? Alara stammered, her voice trembling. Daniel, equally shaken, shook his head. I don't know, but I think we've stumbled upon something we weren't meant to see. He pointed to a newly revealed section of the wall. The pulsating light had retreated, revealing a narrow passage, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. It was dark, utterly black, as if leading into the void itself. Where does that lead? Alara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel hesitated, a flicker of fear in his eyes. I don't know, but I think we need to find out. He took a tentative step towards the passage, then stopped, his body tense. The humming from the walls returned, louder this time, accompanied by a faint, high-pitched whine that set their teeth on edge. Daniel, wait, Alara whispered, clutching his arm. Something's not right. I don't like this. Daniel looked at her, his face pale and drawn. We've come this far, Alara. We need to know the truth. We need to understand. He took another step, then another, disappearing into the blackness of the passage. Alara hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest, then, with a deep breath, she followed him into the unknown. The passage was narrow and claustrophobic, the air thick with the same metallic scent. The humming and whining intensified as they moved deeper, the sounds resonating through the narrow confines, amplifying their effect. Alara felt a growing sense of unease, a primal fear that clawed at her insides. She felt as if they were walking into a trap, a carefully laid snare designed to lure them to their doom. After what felt like an eternity, the passage opened into a larger chamber. This one was circular, with a high, domed ceiling. In the center of the chamber stood a single, massive pillar of obsidian, pulsating with the same violet light they had seen in the previous chamber. But this light was different. It was more intense, more focused, and it pulsed with a rhythmic beat that seemed to synchronize with the humming and whining sounds. And then, they saw them. Around the base of the pillar, arranged in a perfect circle, were dozens of cocoons. They were made of the same obsidian material as the pillar, smooth and polished, yet they pulsed with an inner light that hinted at the life contained within. Alara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She knew, instinctively, what lay inside those cocoons. She knew what the seed the whispers had spoken of truly was. And the realization sent a wave of icy terror washing over her. They are waiting, whispered a voice, not from the walls this time, but from inside her own head. Daniel stood frozen, his eyes wide with horror. He reached out a trembling hand towards one of the cocoons, his fingers brushing against its smooth, cold surface. The cocoon pulsed, the light within intensifying. And then, a crack appeared. The horror had only just begun. Part 16. The Whispers of the Deep. The glyphs, once shimmering with an unearthly blue light, now pulsed a sickly yellow, the shift as subtle as the creeping dread in my gut. Alara's translation, scratched onto the crumbling parchment beside me, spoke of a custodial agreement, a term that chilled me more than any outright threat. We were not guests, not even prisoners. We were livestock. We had ventured deeper into the structure than ever before, lured by the promise of answers but ensnared by a truth far more terrible. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen pressure, the silence punctuated by the rhythmic dripping of an unknown fluid from the cavernous ceiling. Each drop echoed, a morbid metronome counting down to an unknown doom. The corridor we followed narrowed, the cyclopean walls closing in, the glyphs on them shifting and swirling like grotesque, living things. This feels different, Elias whispered, his voice tight with unease. He clutched the makeshift torch, its flickering flame casting long, distorted shadows that danced like phantoms. The energy signature is fluctuating, Lena confirmed, her voice strained as she monitored the readings on her modified Geiger counter. Something is awakening. The ground beneath our feet began to tremble. A low hum resonated through the structure, a sound that vibrated deep within our bones, unsettling and profoundly unnatural. It was the sound of something ancient, something vast, stirring from a slumber that had spanned eons. The glyphs on the walls intensified, their yellow glow now bordering on orange. They seemed to writhe, their cryptic forms twisting and morphing into new, even more disturbing shapes. Faces, elongated, alien faces with oversized, black eyes, seemed to coalesce from the swirling patterns, staring at us with an unnerving intensity. Their silent scrutiny felt like a physical weight, pressing down on us, stealing our breath. Alara whimpered, her eyes wide with terror. She pointed a trembling finger at a section of the wall where the glyphs were most agitated. The prophecy, the cleansing, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. It speaks of a cleansing, a purging of the unworthy. A wave of nausea washed over me. The cleansing. We had found references to it scattered throughout the texts, cryptic passages hinting at a horrific ritual, a systematic extermination. But we had dismissed them as metaphorical, as symbolic. Now, faced with the escalating energy readings, the shifting glyphs, and the deep, resonating hum, the reality of it slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. The tremor intensified. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and the humming grew louder, morphing into a deep, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very core of the planet. Ahead, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. The torchlight couldn't penetrate the darkness within, but the faint, pulsating glow of the glyphs provided a glimpse of the horrors within. Towering shapes loomed in the shadows, their forms indistinct, yet undeniably menacing. The air within the chamber felt thick and viscous, heavy with the stench of decay and something else, something alien and indescribably foul. We hesitated at the threshold, paralyzed by fear. The growling intensified, punctuated by sharp, clicking sounds that echoed through the chamber. The glyphs on the walls pulsed in time with the sounds, bathing the chamber in waves of sickly yellow light. Suddenly, a voice, ancient and resonant, echoed through the chamber. It wasn't a spoken language, not something we could comprehend with our ears. It was a feeling, a sensation that resonated deep within our minds, bypassing language entirely. It was a voice that spoke of power, of dominance, and of utter, chilling indifference. The voice spoke of judgment. Alara screamed. The guttural growling intensified, morphing into a series of high-pitched shrieks that pierced our eardrums. The towering shapes in the shadows shifted, their forms becoming clearer in the pulsating light. They were things that defied description, things that existed outside the realm of human comprehension. Things that were not meant to be seen. Elias dropped the torch, the flame extinguishing in the thick, oppressive air. We were plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the pulsating glyphs, painting the horrific scene in flashes of sickly yellow. The things moved towards us, their clicking sounds growing louder, closer. We were trapped, cornered in the narrow corridor, with no escape. The whispers of the deep had become a deafening roar, and the cleansing, it seemed, was about to begin. The custodians had awakened. What if ancient aliens created the human species? Part 17. The glyphs pulsed with a sickly green luminescence, casting long, distorted shadows across the cavern walls. Alara felt the vibrations deep in her bones, a resonant hum that seemed to synchronize with her own heartbeat. Daniel, pale and sweating, clutched the translated fragment of the Sumerian tablet. His voice, when he spoke, was a strained whisper. It describes a process. A ritual. They didn't just create us, Alara. They can unmake us. Alara stared at him, a chilling dread seeping into her veins. Unmake? What does that even mean? Daniel swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the pulsing glyphs. It talks about the great undoing, a celestial alignment that grants them control. A way to revert us back to the primordial clay. The air in the cavern grew thick, suffocating. The humming intensified, resonating in Alara's teeth. She glanced at the massive, obsidian altar in the center of the chamber, now bathed in the unsettling green light. She had a sudden, horrific vision. Bodies dissolving, flesh melting away, bones turning to dust. We need to get out of here, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Now. But as they turned to leave, the glyphs flared blindingly bright. A wave of energy slammed into them, throwing them against the cavern wall. Alara's head cracked against the stone, and the world dissolved into a dizzying kaleidoscope of light and pain. When she regained consciousness, the humming was louder, vibrating through her entire being. She was lying on the cold stone floor, Daniel slumped beside her, unconscious. The glyphs pulsed rhythmically, their green light painting the cavern in an otherworldly glow. Alara struggled to her feet, her body aching. The air was heavy, charged with a strange energy. She felt different, a strange pressure behind her eyes, a buzzing sensation in her skull. She looked at Daniel, fear clutching at her heart. He was still breathing, but his skin had taken on a grayish pallor. She reached out to shake him awake, but hesitated. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. As she watched, a faint, green shimmer began to emanate from his skin. Thin, almost imperceptible lines of light traced the contours of his body, pulsing in time with the glyphs on the wall. The same lines were appearing on her own arms, spreading like a network of glowing veins. Panic seized her. She tried to scrub the lines away, but they remained, burning faintly against her skin. The humming in her skull intensified, morphing into a voice, a whisper that seemed to come from inside her own head. The great undoing begins, asterisk. Alara stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. The voice, cold and ancient, echoed in the cavern, intertwining with the pulsating rhythm of the glyphs. Return to the source, asterisk. She looked around wildly, searching for an escape, a way to break free from this nightmare. But the cavern seemed to shift and distort around her, the walls pulsating with the same sickening green light. The obsidian altar in the center of the chamber now pulsed with a vibrant, inner light. Alara felt an irresistible pull towards it, a compulsion she couldn't explain. Her legs moved involuntarily, carrying her towards the altar, towards the source of the humming, the voice, the encroaching darkness. Embrace the void, asterisk. Daniel moaned beside her, his body convulsing. The green lines on his skin blazed brightly, and his form began to shimmer, to distort. He was dissolving, his flesh becoming translucent, revealing the skeletal structure beneath. Alara screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the cavern. She fought against the pull, clawing at the stone floor, but the force was too strong. She was being drawn inexorably towards the altar, towards the oblivion that awaited. Become one, asterisk. The green light intensified, engulfing her. She felt her own flesh begin to tingle, to dissolve. The humming filled her head, drowning out all other sounds. She saw her own hands becoming translucent, the bones beneath shimmering in the eerie green light. The voice echoed in her mind, no longer a whisper, but a deafening roar. Return to the clay, asterisk. Alara closed her eyes, surrendering to the inevitable. The last thing she saw was the obsidian altar, pulsing with a malevolent green light, promising not salvation, but annihilation. The last thing she felt was the chilling certainty that humanity, their creation, their purpose, was being undone. The ancient architects had returned, and they were reclaiming their building blocks. Part 18. The Echo of Creation. The obsidian shard pulsed in Alara's hand, radiating a heat that wasn't thermal, but somehow resonated deep within her bones. The cavern walls seemed to breathe, the hieroglyphs shifting, swirling like disturbed water. Above, the constellation recreated in luminous moss pulsed in time with the shard, a celestial heartbeat echoing the unnatural rhythm emanating from the obsidian. It's calling, Elias whispered, his voice hoarse. He clutched the amulet around his neck, its surface vibrating against his skin. The amulet, once a dull, inert piece of bone, now glowed with a sickly, internal luminescence. Calling to what? Alara asked, her gaze fixed on the shifting hieroglyphs. They were no longer abstract symbols, but scenes, flickering vignettes of impossible landscapes, of beings with elongated limbs and oversized heads, manipulating energies she couldn't comprehend. Elias pointed to a section of the wall where the hieroglyphs had coalesced into a clearer image. It depicted a massive, swirling vortex of cosmic energy, stars being born and devoured within its maelstrom. From this chaotic heart, tendrils of light reached out, coalescing into humanoid forms. Creation, he breathed. This shows the architects shaping the first humans. Alara felt a chill crawl down her spine. The implications were terrifying. If the architects had indeed created humanity, were they merely an experiment? Playthings for beings beyond their comprehension? The shard in Alara's hand pulsed again, stronger this time. The air crackled with an unseen energy. The ground beneath their feet trembled, a low, guttural hum reverberating through the cavern. The hieroglyphs, now animated scenes of creation, began to emit a faint, ethereal melody. It wasn't pleasant. It sounded like the groaning of tectonic plates, the shriek of metal twisting under immense pressure, the death rattle of a star. We need to leave, Alara said, her voice tight with fear. The obsidian felt like a living thing, pulsing with an alien energy that was seeping into her, twisting her insides. Elias, however, remained transfixed. His eyes, wide and unseeing, were locked on the vortex of creation depicted on the wall. The amulet around his neck pulsed in sync with the shard, bathing his face in an eerie green light. He began to chant in a language Alara had never heard before, guttural sounds that resonated with the unnatural hum permeating the cavern. Elias, Alara cried, reaching for him. But as her hand brushed against his arm, she was thrown back by an invisible force. She landed hard against the cavern floor, the air knocked out of her lungs. Elias continued to chant, his voice growing louder, more resonant. The hieroglyphs on the walls swirled faster, their light intensifying. The obsidian shard in Alara's hand throbbed, burning her skin. She dropped it with a cry, the shard landing on the cavern floor with a dull thud. Even without holding it, she could feel its power, a sickening, invasive energy that seemed to be probing her mind, whispering promises of forbidden knowledge. The ground shook violently. Cracks appeared in the cavern walls, spreading like spiderwebs. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. Alara struggled to her feet, her legs trembling. She had to get out, had to escape this place before whatever was happening consumed them both. She crawled towards the tunnel entrance, the air thick with dust and the oppressive hum of the approaching something. She glanced back at Elias. He was now levitating a few inches above the ground, his body bathed in a pulsating green light. His eyes were still open, but they were devoid of any recognition, any humanity. He was a puppet, controlled by a force beyond comprehension. As she reached the tunnel entrance, a blinding light erupted from the heart of the cavern, engulfing Elias in its incandescent embrace. Alara shielded her eyes, the light searing even through her closed lids. A wave of heat washed over her, followed by a deafening roar that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. Then, silence. Slowly, Alara lowered her hands, her vision blurred and distorted. The light had vanished. The humming had ceased. The cavern, though still cracked and crumbling, was silent, still. Elias was gone. Where he had stood, there was nothing but a faint, shimmering residue of green energy, slowly dissipating into the air like smoke. The obsidian shard lay on the floor, inert and cold. Alara stumbled out of the cavern and into the tunnel, the oppressive silence echoing the terrifying truth. They had stumbled upon something they weren't meant to understand, a power that dwarfed human comprehension. And now, whatever it was had taken Elias, leaving Alara alone, haunted by the echo of creation and the chilling realization that humanity's place in the universe was far more precarious than she could have ever imagined. Part 19. The Whispering Galleries. The carvings pulsed with a sickly green light, bathing the cavern in an unnerving glow. The humming resonated deeper within us now, a physical vibration that set teeth on edge and made my vision blur. Elena clutched my hand, her face ashen, her breathing shallow. We stood before an immense archway, its surface covered in intricate, alien glyphs that seemed to shift and writhe under the green light. Beyond it, the cavern opened into a vast, echoing space, lost in shadows. This feels wrong," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum. I nodded, my throat tight. The air was thick with a cloying, metallic scent, and the silence beyond the archway was somehow more terrifying than any scream. It was the silence of anticipation, of something vast and ancient waiting. The whispering had intensified, no longer just a murmur at the edge of hearing, but a chorus of sibilant voices just below the threshold of comprehension. They seemed to slither into my mind, probing, searching. "We have to go back," Elena pleaded, pulling at my arm. "This isn't worth it." I hesitated. The rational part of me screamed in agreement. This place felt inherently dangerous, a violation of something sacred and unknowable. But the drive to understand, the burning need to unravel the truth behind humanity's creation, pushed me forward. It was an obsession that had consumed me, a dark star pulling me inexorably towards its destructive gravity. "We've come this far," I said, my voice strained. "We need to see what's on the other side." Elena's eyes widened in fear, but she didn't argue further. Together, we stepped through the archway and into the darkness. The cavern beyond was colossal, dwarfing even the immense chamber we had just left. The green glow faded, replaced by an oppressive blackness that swallowed our flashlights' beams. The humming amplified, bouncing off unseen walls and filling the space with a disorienting drone. The whispering intensified, becoming almost intelligible, a cacophony of voices vying for our attention. As our eyes adjusted to the gloom, we began to make out the contours of the space. The walls were smooth and curved, rising into a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into the darkness above. The floor sloped gently downwards, leading towards a central point where a faint, pulsating light emanated. We descended cautiously, our footsteps echoing eerily in the vast emptiness. The whispering intensified with each step, becoming more focused, more directed. It felt like the voices were converging on us, closing in from all sides. Then we saw them. Standing in a circle around the pulsating light were figures, tall and slender, their forms shrouded in shadows. They were motionless, silent, yet their presence radiated an immense power, a palpable aura of something ancient and alien. What are they? Elena breathed, her voice trembling. I shook my head, unable to speak. The figures were unlike anything I had ever seen, yet they felt disturbingly familiar, like a half-forgotten memory dredged from the depths of my subconscious. The whispering intensified, becoming a torrent of sound, and I realized with a jolt that it was coming from them. They weren't speaking, not in any language I could understand, but communicating through pure thought, their minds broadcasting directly into ours. The pulsating light grew brighter, and as it did, the figures began to turn, slowly, deliberately, their faces emerging from the shadows. Their features were sharp and angular, their eyes large and black, devoid of pupils. Their skin was a pale, sickly gray, stretched taut over their bone structure. They looked ancient, timeless, and utterly inhuman. And as they stared at us, their mouths opened, and the whispering became a deafening roar. It wasn't just sound, it was a flood of information, of images, of emotions. It was the history of the universe, the rise and fall of civilizations, the secrets of creation itself. It was too much, too fast, too alien. My mind reeled, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data. I saw flashes of stars exploding, of galaxies colliding, of strange, amorphous beings swimming in the cosmic soup. I saw the creation of Earth, the slow evolution of life, and then, the arrival of the ancients. I saw them manipulating the very fabric of life, twisting and shaping early hominids, creating a species in their own image. And then, the most horrifying image of all, the ancients' true purpose. They hadn't created humanity out of benevolence or curiosity. They had created us as a vessel, a conduit, a living bridge between our world and something else, something vast and terrifying that existed beyond the veil of reality. The pressure in my skull intensified, a searing pain that threatened to shatter my sanity. I screamed, a primal, wordless cry of terror and agony. Elena collapsed beside me, her eyes wide and unseeing, her body convulsing. The ancients continued their silent broadcast, their minds probing deeper, stripping away our defenses, preparing us for the final, horrifying transformation. The pulsating light intensified, becoming a blinding white, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that we were about to become something other than human, something else. The whispering intensified, becoming a deafening roar that drowned out all other sounds, all other thoughts. It was the sound of creation, of destruction, of the universe itself being remade in the image of the ancients. And in that moment, I understood. We weren't just being shown the truth, we were being absorbed into it. The light consumed us. What if ancient aliens created the human species? Part 20. The glyphs pulsed with a sickening, organic light. Not the sterile glow of electricity, but something closer to bioluminescence, like the belly of a deep-sea predator luring its prey. Alara traced the symbols with a trembling finger, the skin on her hand prickling with a strange static charge. Around her, the cavern hummed, a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in her bones. It was the same hum she'd felt in the Peruvian jungle, the same hum that now seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth. Daniel, pale and sweating, clutched the deciphered text. He'd aged 10 years in the last few hours, the youthful eagerness in his eyes replaced with a hollow dread. It's a warning, he whispered, his voice cracking. A warning? Alara's breath hitched. About what? He swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the glyphs. About the harvest. The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Alara felt a chill crawl up her spine, despite the oppressive heat of the cavern. The harvest. It was a term they had encountered repeatedly in their research, a term always shrouded in cryptic symbolism and ominous implications. They had theorized it referred to some kind of cyclical event, a point of convergence between humanity and their creators. But the true meaning had remained elusive, a terrifying enigma. Now, standing in the heart of this ancient, alien structure, the meaning felt horrifyingly clear. Daniel pointed to a specific series of glyphs, his finger shaking. This depicts a celestial alignment, a conjunction of specific stars. And this, his voice trailed off, his face contorting in disgust. This shows extraction. Alara peered closer, her stomach churning. The glyphs were disturbingly graphic. They depicted humanoid figures, contorted in pain, their bodies seemingly being emptied. Like husks being drained of their essence. They take something from us, she murmured, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. They created us, to be harvested. The humming in the cavern intensified, the air growing thick and charged. The glyphs pulsed faster, their organic light growing brighter, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the cavern walls. Alara felt a pressure building in her ears, a dizzying sensation that made her stumble. "We have to get out of here," Daniel gasped, his eyes wide with terror. Now, he grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the tunnel they had entered through. But as they turned to flee, the ground beneath them began to tremble. A deep, guttural roar echoed through the cavern, a sound that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. It was a sound of immense power, of ancient, unknowable malice. The glyphs on the walls blazed with an unbearable light, the cavern bathed in an eerie, pulsating glow. The air crackled with energy, and a wave of intense heat washed over them. Alara cried out, shielding her eyes, feeling a searing pain behind her eyelids. Then, the ground beneath them split open. A chasm yawned before them, plunging into an abyss of impenetrable darkness. The roar intensified, and from the depths of the chasm, something began to rise. It was a shape of unimaginable horror, a grotesque parody of life. It was vast, its form shifting and writhing in the darkness, its outlines barely discernible in the pulsating light. Tendrils of inky blackness reached out from the chasm, writhing like monstrous serpents, their tips dripping with a viscous, luminescent fluid. Alara and Daniel stumbled back, their hearts pounding in their chests. They were trapped, cornered between the monstrous entity rising from the chasm and the pulsating, glowing glyphs that seemed to be calling to it. The creature roared again, and the very air seemed to vibrate with the sound. Its tendrils lashed out, snaking towards them with terrifying speed. Alara screamed, pushing Daniel behind her, her mind racing, desperately searching for a way out. But there was no escape. The tendrils wrapped around them, constricting their bodies, lifting them into the air. Alara struggled, kicking and screaming, but the grip was too strong. She could feel the viscous fluid on her skin, burning and corrosive, eating away at her clothes. As she was lifted towards the monstrous form in the chasm, she saw it. A single, massive eye, burning with a cold, indifferent light, gazed down at her. It was an eye that held no emotion, no recognition, only a vast, consuming hunger. And in that moment, Alara understood. The harvest had begun. They were not the Creator's children. They were their crop, and they were about to be reaped. Part 21. The Whispers of the Deep. The glyphs pulsed, a sickly green light reflecting in Elias's wide, terrified eyes. He traced the intricate carvings with a trembling finger, the cold stone biting into his skin. He knew, with a dreadful certainty, he was close. Close to the truth, close to the architects, close to his own damnation. The cavern, discovered deep beneath the abandoned observatory, was unlike anything he had ever seen. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, the silence broken only by the rhythmic drip of water echoing through the vast space. And the glyphs, they covered every surface, pulsating, whispering secrets in a language he couldn't understand, but felt deep in his bones. He glanced back at Amelia, huddled by the entrance, her face pale and drawn. She clutched the ancient lamp, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows that exaggerated the grotesque forms of the carvings. She hadn't spoken since they descended into the cavern, her silence more unsettling than any scream. He tried to offer a reassuring smile, but his lips felt frozen. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing down on him like a physical weight. He could feel the whispers now, not just see them. They slithered into his mind, tendrils of thought that weren't his own, probing, testing. "Amelia," he croaked, his voice raspy, unfamiliar. We need to get out of here." She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on something beyond him. He followed her gaze and his blood ran cold. The wall at the back of the cavern was shifting, the glyphs swirling and merging into a single, pulsating eye. It stared at him, ancient, malevolent, filled with a cosmic indifference that chilled him to the core. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was what the ancients had been hiding. Not just their existence, but their purpose. He remembered the fragmented transmissions, the warnings hidden within the static, the desperate pleas for someone, anyone, to understand. They hadn't created humanity out of benevolence. They hadn't uplifted us. They had sown us. He saw it then, in the depths of that pulsating eye, the reflection of his own face, twisted and distorted, becoming something other, something less. He saw the reflection of Amelia, her features blurring, her eyes hollow and black. He saw the reflection of humanity, a fleeting image, a pale ghost against the vastness of cosmic horror. A low hum filled the cavern, growing in intensity, resonating deep within Elias's chest. The glyphs on the wall blazed with an unholy light, the eye widening, consuming everything in its gaze. The ground beneath him trembled, the whispers intensified, becoming a chorus of voices, a cacophony of alien thought invading his mind, stripping away his individuality, his very essence. He stumbled back, his hands flying to his ears, trying to block out the sound, the thoughts, the encroaching darkness. He looked at Amelia, pleading with her to say something, to do something, but she remained frozen, her eyes still locked on the pulsing eye, a faint smile playing on her lips. The hum became a roar, the light blinding, the whispers deafening. He felt his body changing, his bones shifting, his skin crawling. He screamed, a primal, wordless sound of pure terror, but his scream was swallowed by the roar, lost in the blinding light. He reached for Amelia, his fingers brushing against hers. For a fleeting moment, he felt a connection, a spark of recognition in her hollow eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by a cold, alien emptiness. She turned to him, her smile widening, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too long. The last thing Elias saw, before the darkness consumed him completely, was the reflection of his own transformation in Amelia's eyes. He saw the ancient looking back at him, not as a creator, but as a harvester. He understood then, humanity hadn't been created, it had been cultivated, a crop, sown and nurtured, ready for the reaping. The whispers weren't secrets, they were instructions. Instructions for the harvest. The cavern pulsed with the final, triumphant roar of the ancients. The earth trembled, the sky screamed, and the harvest began. The whispers faded into silence, leaving behind a chilling emptiness. The pulsing eye on the wall dimmed, its purpose fulfilled. In the cavern, where once there had been two humans, stood two silent, alien figures, their eyes fixed on the surface world, waiting for the signal. The signal to spread the harvest. The silence stretched, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water, each drop echoing the chilling truth of humanity's fate. The ancients had returned, and humanity, their carefully cultivated crop, was ripe. What if ancient aliens created the human species? Part 22. The glyphs pulsed, a sickly green light now emanating from their intricate carvings. Elias felt a pressure against his skull, a silent, insistent throbbing that mirrored the rhythm of the light. The air crackled with static, and the hairs on his arms stood on end. The sensation was familiar, horribly so, reminiscent of the nightmares that had plagued him since the dig site. But this was real, this was happening. Elena, her face ashen, clutched the fragmented clay tablet, her knuckles white. The symbols on her fragment, identical to those on the wall, glowed with the same unsettling luminescence. Her breathing was shallow, ragged gasps that echoed in the oppressive silence of the chamber. They're communicating, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the electrical hum that filled the air. They're inside my head. Elias swallowed, his throat dry. He could feel it too, a subtle probing, like tendrils of thought slipping past his defenses. Not voices, not words, but emotions, raw and overwhelming. Fear, anticipation, hunger. He reached out, his hand hovering over the glowing glyphs on the wall. A jolt of energy arced between his fingertips and the stone, throwing him back against the cold, damp wall. He gasped, his hand numb, a burning sensation spreading up his arm. The glyphs intensified, the green light pulsating faster, brighter. The humming grew louder, evolving into a low, guttural drone that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the chamber. Elena screamed, a high-pitched, keening wail that cut through the drone. She dropped the clay tablet, clutching her head, her body convulsing. "They're changing it," she choked out between sobs. "Rewriting the code." Elias didn't understand. Code? What code? He looked at the discarded tablet, the glowing symbols now shifting, rearranging themselves into new, unfamiliar patterns. He realized, with a sickening lurch in his stomach, that the glyphs on the wall were changing too, morphing in sync with the tablet. The pressure in his head intensified, becoming a sharp, stabbing pain. The emotions flooding his mind grew stronger, more primal. He tasted blood, metallic and sharp, and realized he was biting his tongue. He felt a strange compulsion, an overwhelming urge to comply. To submit. He looked at Elena. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, stared straight ahead. A thin stream of blood trickled from her nose, and her lips moved silently, forming words he couldn't hear. She was changing. He could feel it. Something alien, something ancient, was taking root within her, twisting and reshaping her very essence. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the same was happening to him. The droning reached a fever pitch, the green light blinding. The chamber seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, the air thick and suffocating. Elias felt his knees buckle, his body trembling uncontrollably. He could no longer resist. He was theirs. Suddenly, the light vanished. The droning ceased. The pressure in his head dissipated, leaving behind a dull ache. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. Elias blinked, his vision blurry. He looked around, disoriented. The glyphs on the wall were still, their green light extinguished. They had returned to their original configuration, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, something profound, something irreversible. Elena lay slumped on the floor, her breathing shallow but regular. She looked different. Her features, once soft and familiar, now seemed sharper, more angular. Her eyes, though closed, held a strange, unsettling luminosity. He reached out to her, his hand trembling. He touched her shoulder, gently shaking her. Her eyes flickered open. They were no longer the warm brown he knew. They were a cold, vibrant green, mirroring the color of the glyphs. She looked at him, her gaze devoid of recognition, devoid of emotion. "The sequence is complete," she said, her voice flat, toneless. A voice that was no longer her own. A wave of nausea washed over Elias. He stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what the sequence was. He knew what it meant. The aliens hadn't created humanity. They hadn't abandoned us. They had been waiting, dormant, encoded within our very DNA. And now, the signal had been received. The sequence activated. They were awake. And humanity, their meticulously crafted vessel, was ready to serve its purpose. He looked at Elena, at the alien intelligence now inhabiting her familiar form, and understood, with a terror that chilled him to the bone, what that purpose was. We were not the children of the stars. We were their puppets. And the play was about to begin. The final act. What if ancient aliens created the human species? Part 23. The obsidian pyramid pulsed with a malevolent energy, the ground beneath my feet vibrating in a rhythmic, sickening throb. Above, the crimson sky swirled like a wounded beast, the twin suns bleeding into the horizon. The glyphs carved into the pyramid's surface seemed to shift and writhe before my eyes, a silent, mocking language I instinctively knew I couldn't understand, but dreaded to. Elias, pale and trembling, clutched the fragmented clay tablet, his eyes wide with terror. It's happening," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the low hum emanating from the pyramid. The convergence. We were alone. The others, consumed by the creeping madness that followed the awakening of the pyramids, had scattered, driven by fragmented visions and whispers from the deep. Sarah, strong and resolute Sarah, had succumbed just hours before, her eyes glazing over with a hollow emptiness before she wandered into the swirling dust devils that danced across the barren landscape. Now, only Elias and I remained, standing at the foot of this monstrous structure, the epicenter of our species' impending doom. The tablet in Elias's hand, pieced together from fragments we'd found scattered throughout the ruined city, depicted the convergence, a celestial alignment predicted by the ancient texts, an event that would usher in the return of the creators. And with their return, came judgment. A low growl, like the grinding of tectonic plates, echoed from within the pyramid. The ground beneath us cracked, splitting open to reveal pulsating veins of molten rock. The air grew thick and heavy, saturated with the metallic tang of blood. The obsidian surface of the pyramid began to shimmer, as though a liquid darkness flowed beneath its skin. What do they want? I asked, my voice a dry rasp. The fear was a physical presence now, choking the air from my lungs. Elias shook his head, his gaze fixed on the shifting glyphs. They created us, he murmured, engineered us, molded us to their purpose. And now they've come to collect. A blinding light erupted from the apex of the pyramid, lancing into the blood-red sky. The twin suns seemed to shrink and darken, eclipsed by the raw power emanating from the structure. The humming intensified, transforming into a deafening roar that vibrated deep within my bones. The very fabric of reality seemed to unravel, the landscape twisting and distorting around us. Suddenly, the ground beneath us gave way. We plunged into darkness, the air rushing past us as we fell into the heart of the pyramid. The fall seemed to last an eternity, filled with the echoing roar and the sickening sensation of weightlessness. Then, with a jarring impact, we landed on a cold, hard surface. We found ourselves in a vast chamber, the air thick with an acrid, otherworldly scent. The walls were lined with intricate carvings, pulsing with the same malevolent energy as the exterior of the pyramid. In the center of the chamber, bathed in a pulsating crimson light, stood a monolithic structure, an altar, perhaps, or a throne. And before it, a figure. It was tall and slender, its form shrouded in a shimmering, iridescent cloak. Its face was obscured by a swirling veil of darkness, but I could feel its gaze, cold, calculating, and utterly alien. It radiated an aura of immense power, a power that dwarfed even the monstrous energy of the pyramid itself. Elias, whimpering, huddled against me, clutching the fragmented tablet. He pointed a trembling finger at the figure. The architect, he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. The architect, the being depicted in the ancient texts, the creator of humanity, the one who had molded us from clay and breathed life into our lifeless forms. And now, it stood before us, silent and imposing, its presence filling the chamber with an unbearable dread. The architect raised a hand, a gesture slow and deliberate. The swirling veil of darkness that concealed its face parted slightly, revealing a glimpse of what lay beneath. It wasn't a face in the human sense, but a shifting, amorphous mass of light and shadow, constantly changing, reforming, defying any attempt to comprehend its true form. And from that swirling void, a voice echoed, resonating deep within our minds, bypassing our ears entirely. You have failed, the voice said, cold and emotionless. You have not fulfilled your purpose, Elias shook his head, tears streaming down his face. We didn't understand, he stammered. We tried. The architect's voice cut him off. Your efforts are irrelevant. The cycle must be reset. A wave of energy pulsed from the architect, washing over us. I felt a searing pain, as though my very being was being unraveled, pulled apart at a molecular level. Elias screamed, a high-pitched, agonizing sound that faded quickly into silence. The world around me dissolved into a kaleidoscope of swirling colors and distorted shapes. I could feel myself fading, dissolving into nothingness. And as the darkness consumed me, I heard the architect's voice one last time, cold and indifferent. The experiment has concluded. The echoing silence that followed Alara's scream was more terrifying than the scream itself. The glyphs on the obsidian wall pulsed a sickly green, the light reflecting in the widening pool of crimson at her feet. Jackson, his face a mask of horrified disbelief, knelt beside her, his hand hovering over the wound that now bisected her chest. A wound too clean, too precise, to be anything but the work of the architects. They're here, he whispered, the words catching in his throat. They're actually here. I couldn't speak. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a pressure against my eardrums like a diver descending too deep. The hieroglyphs, once indecipherable symbols, now seemed to writhe, their meanings twisting into grotesque parodies of understanding. They spoke of judgment, of harvest, of a debt long overdue. The ground trembled, dust rained down from the crumbling ceiling, and a low, resonant hum vibrated through the chamber, shaking us to our core. Fear, cold and visceral, coiled in my gut. We were trapped, cornered like rats in the architect's labyrinth. A section of the far wall shimmered, the obsidian dissolving like smoke to reveal an opening. A blinding light spilled into the chamber, momentarily obscuring everything. When my vision cleared, silhouettes began to emerge from the light. Tall, impossibly slender figures, their forms shrouded in shimmering robes that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Their faces were obscured by cowls, but I could feel their gaze, cold and dissecting, boring into me. One of the figures stepped forward, its movements fluid and unnervingly graceful. It raised a hand, and the air around us crackled with even greater intensity. Jackson, cradling Alara's lifeless body, looked up at the figure, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and defiance. "Why?" he croaked, his voice hoarse. "Why are you doing this?" The figure did not respond. Instead, it lowered its hand, and a beam of emerald light shot forth, striking the obsidian wall next to us. The glyphs on the wall flared brightly, and a section of the stone slid away, revealing a narrow passage. Another figure glided forward, its voice resonating within our minds, a sound that bypassed our ears and spoke directly to our consciousness. "The cycle completes. The harvest begins. Asterisk." The words echoed in my skull, their meaning chillingly clear. Alara wasn't the first victim. She was merely the first offering. The figures gestured towards the newly revealed passage. Escape? Or another trap? There was no way to know. But to stay here, in the presence of these beings, was to invite certain death. Jackson, his face streaked with tears and dust, gently laid Alara's body down. He rose, his eyes fixed on the shimmering figures. He looked at me, a silent question in his gaze. I nodded, my heart pounding against my ribs. We had to try. We stumbled towards the passage, the oppressive presence of the architects weighing heavily upon us. The passage was narrow, claustrophobic, the air thick with the same unsettling energy that permeated the chamber. The walls pulsed with a faint green light, illuminating strange, organic patterns that seemed to shift and writhe as we passed. The passage twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the heart of the structure. The humming sound grew louder, the vibrations intensifying until I felt my teeth begin to chatter. I could hear Jackson's ragged breathing behind me, the only sound in the suffocating silence. Suddenly, the passage opened into a vast cavern. The scale of it was breathtaking, dwarfing even the chamber we had just left. The cavern was lit by a strange, ethereal glow that emanated from the walls, revealing intricate carvings that covered every surface. The carvings depicted scenes of unimaginable horror, grotesque experiments, twisted mutations, beings caught in states of perpetual agony. In the center of the cavern, bathed in the eerie light, stood a massive structure. It was roughly cylindrical in shape, constructed of a dark, metallic substance that seemed to absorb the surrounding light. Cables and wires snaked out from the structure, disappearing into the walls of the cavern. It pulsed with the same rhythmic hum that had been growing louder as we descended, the source of the unsettling energy that permeated the entire structure. The architects stood around the structure, their forms silhouetted against the eerie glow. They were chanting in a low, guttural tongue, their voices weaving together into a discordant symphony of dread. As we watched, horrified, a section of the cylindrical structure opened, revealing a blinding white light. From within the light, a figure emerged. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin was pale and translucent, its eyes large and black, devoid of pupils. Its limbs were long and spindly, its movements jerky and unnatural. It was one of us. But twisted, corrupted, a grotesque mockery of the human form. The architects continued their chanting, their voices rising in intensity. The figure in the center of the cavern began to convulse, its body twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. Its screams, silent and agonizing, echoed in my mind. This was the architect's purpose. This was the harvest. They had created us, not as children, but as livestock. We were their experiment, their playthings, and now, our time was up. Part 25. The Harvest. The glyphs pulsed with a sickening green light, the final piece of the puzzle snapping into place in Amelia's mind. The ancients hadn't abandoned us. They'd been waiting, cultivating, and now, the harvest was upon us. The earth trembled, a deep, guttural groan escaping its depths. The air crackled with an unseen energy, the very atmosphere seeming to vibrate in anticipation. From the obsidian ziggurat, a beam of blinding white light shot skyward, piercing the cloud cover and disappearing into the inky blackness of space. It was a beacon, a signal. Around the world, similar beams erupted from forgotten temples, long-buried pyramids, and hidden structures woven into the fabric of reality itself. Amelia felt a sickening lurch in her stomach, a primal fear that bypassed logic and reason. The scattered pieces of her research, the whispers of ancient texts, the unsettling prophecies of forgotten cultures, it all coalesced into a terrifyingly clear image. Humanity wasn't created, it was grown. The tremors intensified, the ground now bucking and heaving like a wounded beast. Fissures ripped through the earth, spewing forth plumes of noxious gas and molten rock. The sky, once illuminated by the eerie green glow of the glyphs, was now dominated by the blinding white beams, turning night into a grotesque parody of day. Amelia stumbled back, her hand instinctively reaching for David, but he was gone, swallowed by the chaos. She was alone, a single insignificant ant in the face of a cosmic apocalypse. The air grew thick, heavy, charged with an alien energy that tasted of metal and ozone. A low, resonant hum began to permeate the air, a sound that seemed to vibrate not just in her ears, but in her very bones. Then, the sky began to tear. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, but slowly, insidiously, as if some unseen hand was peeling back the layers of reality. Through the widening rift, Amelia saw it. Not a ship, not a fleet, but something else. Vast, incomprehensible, a swirling vortex of colors that defied human perception. It was a being of pure energy, of unimaginable scale, its presence warping the very fabric of spacetime. From the rift, tendrils of light reached down, ethereal fingers probing the earth, caressing the activated ziggurats. Amelia watched in horrified fascination as the beams of light intensified, merging with the tendrils, creating a conduit of energy between Earth and the entity beyond the rift. Then, the screaming began. It wasn't a human scream. It was something other. A chorus of dissonant wails and unearthly shrieks that echoed across the ravaged landscape, a symphony of pure terror. Amelia clamped her hands over her ears, but the sound seemed to bypass her eardrums, vibrating directly within her skull. The ground beneath her feet began to glow, a sickly green light mirroring the glyphs. She looked down and saw the earth dissolving, turning into a viscous, shimmering liquid. The same was happening all around her, the very landscape melting into a swirling green pool. The air shimmered, distorted, as if reality itself was unraveling. She understood then. The ancients hadn't created humans. They had seeded the earth. They had nurtured us, guided our evolution, not out of benevolence, but out of a far more sinister purpose. We weren't children, we were a crop. And now, the harvest was beginning. The green liquid began to rise, engulfing her ankles, her knees, her waist. She felt a strange detachment, a sense of unreality, as if she were watching herself from a great distance. The screaming intensified, a cacophony of despair that resonated with the very core of her being. As the liquid reached her chest, Amelia looked up, one last desperate glance towards the rift. The entity beyond pulsed, its colors shifting and swirling, a kaleidoscope of cosmic horror. And then, she saw them. Silhouettes, thousands of them, humanoid in shape, but different. Larger, more angular, their bodies radiating a faint, ethereal glow. They were descending from the rift, carried by the tendrils of light, their eyes fixed on the earth below. Amelia knew, with chilling certainty, that these were the ancients. The gardeners, and we were their harvest. The green liquid reached her neck, its touch surprisingly cold. Amelia closed her eyes, the screaming fading into a distant hum. She felt a strange sense of peace, a release from the terror. It was over. The final thought that flickered through her mind, before the green consumed her entirely, was a single, chilling word: food. The earth fell silent. The beams of light retracted, the rift in the sky slowly sealing shut. The swirling green liquid receded, leaving behind a barren, scarred landscape. The ancients, their task complete, ascended back through the rift, carrying with them the essence of humanity, the fruits of their long and patient cultivation. The earth was empty, the harvest was over, and the universe, indifferent to the fate of one small planet, continued its relentless march through time and space.